Hey everybody, welcome to BODS Mayhem Hour. I'm your host, John the Bod, aka the Bod Father, and as always, I bring you guys awesome interviews. And ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor and privilege to have the guitarist, Mr. Chris Green, on the show. He is formerly of, and I hope I'm pronouncing these right, Chris, and you can help me pronounce these if I'm getting these incorrect, but is it Furyon, is that right? Is the first band you was part of, and then Tyketto and Rubicon Cross?
Yep, that's right. That's right. Thanks very much for having me on the show.
Oh, this is great, and we're going to be talking to you about your debut instrumental EP called Unveil, and I want to get right into this, man. Was you nervous at all putting this EP out as your debut, or even thinking of putting one out, solo-wise? Or is this something you wanted to do previously?
There's like a few factors on why I decided to do it. The main one was years ago when my father was alive, we'd talk all the time about music, and he'd give me a lot of advice and he'd coach me through a lot of situations, especially through like record contracts and stuff, because he'd been a musician all his life.
Right.
And, we'd kind of sit and, bitch about the music business. And he probably got a little fed up one night of me just bitching about singers and what it's like, the whole democratic process of being in a band.
Yeah.
And he said, well, why don't you just do your own thing? Just do your own thing under your own name. Then you're your own boss. And then, to be honest, you can just quit bitching at me about this whole thing, and I won't have to listen to you going on about it all the time. So that's where the seed had really been planted. I'd always been a fan of instrumental music, Steve Vai, Eric Johnson, Andy Timmons, Marty Friedman, all of that early Shrapnel Records stuff from the 80s. But I'd never really thought about composing instrumental music. And after he died, which was in 2011, I thought, you know what, if I'm going to do it, I should just do it now, because I was very kind of raw on emotions because we were very close. And so at that point, I just started writing. And what happened is I almost left from the funeral and went straight to, where was it? In Raleigh, North Carolina. And it was a benefit show. And I was with my good friend, CJ Snare, the singer of Firehouse, who's the singer in Rubicon Cross, the band I play in.
Yeah.
And we got up on stage to play. And he just said, man, why don't you just go off on one and just play like a bunch of, I'll hit some keyboard pads and you just like rip out some solo stuff. And I did. And what came out of it was pretty much the intro section to Undefeated, the first track on the EP. And that kind of, I looked back at the video footage of it when someone posted it on YouTube, and I thought, you know what, that sounds cool. If I can really mess around with this a little more and explore, then maybe I'll be able to actually do this, because it's a very, very different approach from writing normal music. You'd think that it's just going to be as simple as taking what you'd usually do in a solo section of a song and then just lengthening it out to 3 or 4 minutes or something. But it's a completely different approach, in my opinion. You're still trying to keep the listener's ear interested, and to do that, you need melody. And so instead of going the route of more like the Satriani route, where you kind of almost just swap out the vocals and have almost like a verse, bridge, chorus formula, I decided to make it a little more proggy and use a lot more string section stuff. And it was, every single song on the EP, I think, has its own character, which I'm really proud of. It's not just me blazing away for 5 tracks, and some of them are like 7 or 8 minutes long. One of them has no repeating sections whatsoever in it. It's a very progressive kind of song, but I always pride myself on playing for the mood. So anyone that's a lover of lead guitar stuff, I think would definitely get a kick out of this EP.
Like I said earlier, you played with several bands, but doing this solo-wise, does this give you more freedom to do what you want to do? Is this just more like, hey, I want to do more solo stuff with this?
Yeah, and I guess one of the other reasons for doing it is that I do like progressive music, and I love, Dream Theater and, Queensryche and Tool and Mastodon.
Oh yeah.
And ultimately, if I didn't do this kind of thing, I think that would seep over into my writing with my more melodic bands, which I couldn't allow to happen.
Oh, yeah.
So the more I was listening to that heavier music, the more I thought I should probably do my own thing here, because, you know, like we were writing for the second Tyketto album even, you know, and I noticed that heavier riffs were kind of creeping in there. And to me, they weren't even heavy, you know, but the guys were like, I don't know, I think that's maybe a little too much. And so that's why it's a really great outlet for me, you know, to be able to just really do my own thing. And the way I demo the tracks is that I write them from scratch, and I use like a drum machine, so I can program everything so it's incredibly syncopated and exactly how I want it. And then I go into the studio and I play all of the instruments with the exception of the drums. And the guy that played the drums on this EP actually was Garrett Whitlock, who plays in Tremonti, right, Mark Tremonti's band. And he lived only a few miles away from me at the time here in Atlanta. He's in Orlando now, but man, he came in cold on that, and he did just like such a stunning job on the drums. Really phenomenal, very, very underrated drummer. And so I had the chance really to just go for it and be completely free. And one of the tracks that's on there, that's called Once Forgotten, the third track, I wrote completely on my laptop using fake guitar sounds without even a guitar in my hand on a flight over from London to Chicago.
Wow.
And the reason it's called Once Forgotten is because I was always a little partial to making the most of the free booze on those international flights to try and make some of your money back. So, you know, as soon as the flight attendants would come along, I'd be like, yeah, give me a couple of those little bottles of wine. And, you know, they'd come back again. I'd be like, hey, give me another one there, maybe a beer. And, oh, no, yeah, let me have a cocktail. You know, and then I'd just sit on my laptop and I'd bring up the keyboard on there, and I would literally just punch in note by note the melodies that I was hearing in my head. And then I'd play it back. And if it sounded a little strange, I'd adjust the note here and there. Then I'd put drums to it, bass to it. And I'd complete this entire song. But when I woke up on the plane in Chicago, the battery had run out, and I'd completely forgotten that I'd written this thing. And so it was months later that I was scouring through for any ideas, for inspiration for a new song, and up pops this full 6-minute epic prog track called Solo Prog, you know. And I was like, what's that? And it must have triggered something in my mind of a memory, and I thought, oh my God, I was working on the plane, wasn't I? No wonder. And so I called it Once Forgotten, because I'd completely forgotten about the track. And it was only that I went scouring through the memory banks of my computer that it ended up coming to light.
I know this is only a 5-track EP, but Chris, is there anything that's impressed you the most about making this debut Unveil? What's caught your eye about, if anything, man?
The thing that's made me most proud about this is that the majority of people that I speak to about it comment and compliment on how emotive they think the tracks are. And the fact that people get that really, really means a lot to me, because I painstakingly wrote and rewrote and went over these tracks to make sure that the swells and the crescendos and the build-ups and everything in these tracks were really powerful, you know, and I just wasn't going through the motions. And it took me a long time, and I painstakingly wrote and adjusted all of the string sections, you know, to really add some body and gravitas to the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And the fact that people get that is really wonderful, because that's why I did it. I didn't do it for any financial gain. I mean, if anyone was going to think about doing instrumental music for financial gain these days, then they're probably looking at an incredibly fine area of listeners. Yeah. So it's a labor of love, and the fact that people seem to love it makes the label worthwhile.
This is a kind of lengthy question, but your father was your best friend and biggest supporter, as though my father was too. He's passed too. It's been 18 years this November.
I'm sorry.
But Undefeated off this album is your tribute to him. Was this difficult at times to put together, or did it flow pretty easily? And is there any other songs off this EP that stand out for you, man?
The hardest part was there's a track on there called, the last track on the EP is called Welcome for a Soldier, and it's actually a track by my dad's 1970s band called Deep Feeling.
Awesome.
And I went through it and I listened to it over and over again, kept the same key. I almost kept note for note. The drums I programmed meticulously, so they were exactly like Graham's drummings. So it was as close to it as a tribute as I could get. And the day that I was meant to go in and record, myself and the singer at Deep Feeling were very close friends, John Swale. And I was meant to go and see him after I'd finished recording, and I got a phone call as I was walking in the studio. It was my sister, and she told me that John had died. He'd kind of been playing down how bad the cancer was that he'd had, and it was just it just really broke me, because I was already heading in to record a track that it was already very much in my mind that this was. I wanted to get this right, because this was very specifically a tribute to my dad, because it was covering his band. With John going, the producer, Rick, turned around to me and said, "Listen, man, why don't you just take the day off?" And I said, no, if I'm going to do this, then I've got to do it right now. And we recorded the track, and you know what? It probably came out as the best track on the album, in my opinion. Sonically, I really just completely sunk within myself. You know, I do quite a bit of improvisation on. I'm usually very anal about having all of my notes and licks worked out beforehand. But that one, Rick convinced me to just, close my eyes and let loose a little. And so that's probably the one I'm most proud of.
18 years from my dad being passed away, and everybody's like, oh, it'll get better in time. It don't get better. It gets easier. I know your dad, you said 2011, so that's been, 7 years for you. So,
Yes.
It gets easier, man. I know it's hard to say that, no, it's not, but it does in time. But my condolences to you, my friend.
Thank you. I appreciate it. You too.
So at this point, I know you played for years, and I know you're not inventing the wheel of guitar playing, but how much growth musically have you seen yourself go through up to the release of this EP? And how hard do you push yourself, Chris, to come up with new stuff that's being invented every day with guitar players, man?
It's more and more difficult. I think I push myself very hard myself. I probably do 5 or 10 more takes than I need to on a track, because in my head I can hear like a harmonic that should have been there or something, and the producers constantly say to me, "Man, just leave it. It sounds great. It sounds really live. It sounds really natural." And I'll be like, "No, I want it to be absolutely perfect." And I'm often guilty of letting it carry over into almost too clinical. And there's a lot of players out there like that. There's a lot of very young players, and absolute kudos to them for the time that they put into getting these techniques together. But for some of them, I think they haven't quite grasped voice on the guitar. And I think as any guitar player that's been in the industry for, at least a decade, maybe 2 decades, finding your own sound on the guitar is really the holy grail. Being able to have that sound with other, even if you're a guest on stage and you're using someone else's guitar and someone else's amp, that sound still shines through your hands. That's the ultimate goal, and that's what I have pushed to achieve. So I'm always conscious, listen back to it and think, does that me? Because that, again, I've had some really lovely compliments about my playing. I've been fortunate enough to have some great compliments. I remember one specific time when someone called me up and said, "Man, I just heard this track by Harry Hess, the singer of Harem Scarum, and some guy's done a solo on the end of that album. It sounds just you, man." And I was like, "What?" And he gave me the track, and I was like, "No, man, I did play on that. I did a session." And it was like a session I'd done like 6 months before. So this guy had heard it and completely clocked it sounding like my style, and it turns out it was me. So there's got to be something to that. And it's maybe the 3rd time that had happened to me. So I push myself to make sure that I am stylistically recognized in the sea of musicians that are out there.
Yeah, because you talk about sound, man. When Zakk Wylde's playing, when Slash
Eric
is playing.
Johnson. You know when these guys are playing,
right.
and like I say, it's difficult. The the current style really seems to be much more of the fusion thing. There's a guy that used to work at a place called the Bryan Institute of Modern England, where I used to live, and I used to have to cover his class on tour with the band Asia, and his name's Guthrie Govan. And Guthrie is a phenomenal player, and I hear he's become so popular, a lot of his playing in most of the modern lead guitar players out there now. You know, very fast 3-note push string, legato, mixing like slight jazz in there with rock music, kind of Larry Carlton style. And I mean, that's not my bag. I don't go out there and try to like keep up with the times. Like, oh look, the new technique out there is this, so I have to make sure that I'm fluent in doing that. I just try and keep my head down and do what I do.
Are you wanting to go on tour with this, Chris, or what's up with that, dude? What you thinking on?
It's been talked about a lot more recently, and I've had some musicians step forward and say, hey, if you want to do this, then I will be more than happy to do this with you, because as you've heard, it's quite demanding music. And so it's not the kind of thing that I want to turn around to someone and say, hey, learn this incredibly technical stuff and then come out on the road and, you know, we're not going to earn much money because it's kind of unheard of. So putting a project like that together and putting it on the road can be quite difficult, even to find an audience for that type of music. But more and more feedback I'm getting, I think like this, and just test the waters out. And, you know, I mean, if it bombs, it bombs, and if people enjoy it, they enjoy it. You know, I'm not out there to break any boundaries or change the world. Just want to share the music.
What made you want to become a musician? What was that spark for you? I know you said your father was a musician, but let's talk about that.
Well, like on TV and in the charts, and I grew up with musicians being in the house, and there'd be huge house parties and then live bands playing out in the garden. So it was very much just part of mine and my sister's life from day one, really. And I think it was inevitable that either me or my sister were going to somehow get involved in it. It turned out being me. He had an old, banged up acoustic in his office. And I remember going in there once and just being like fascinated by it and just kind of picking at the strings. And like anyone would do if they picked up guitar, they'd just kind of sit and strum the strings and not really know what to do with the other hand that goes on the fretboard.
Right.
And I guess after a while of making some pretty horrific, he decided, okay, well, at least let me show you how to play something that's going to sound reasonably tunable. And so he showed me a couple of things, and like I just sat there for hours until I learned it. And then I'd go back and say, teach me more. And then he said, all right, well, we need to get someone to actually maybe show you some better stuff. And so his friend at the time, Steve Hawkins, he showed me how to play like a bunch of like Shadows numbers and Dire Straits numbers and stuff. And from the age of about 12, 13, I'd go up to playing at pubs with my dad. I'd get up and do like a 20-minute spot, you know, with some backing tracks. So from very early on, I knew that like the performance side of it was something that I really, really wanted to do.
Out of all the bands you've been with, Chris, is there any show or moment that stands out to you more than any that you can recall being part of those bands going, man, I can't believe I'm actually seeing this or doing this right now?
Yeah, absolutely. 2008, December 2008, I got a phone call from CJ saying that Bill Levity was sick and couldn't do the Firehouse tour, which was a tour of India. And I had a limited amount of time to learn a very long set. But I just said, yeah, let's do it. At the time, I was playing in Nelson and Scrap Metal, which was like the Nelson Brothers with Mark Slaughter, Kip Winger, Eric Martin, and a bunch of other famous people, Jimmy Jameson. And so I think I'd just come off of a cruise with the Nelson guys, and I got that call, and I was like, don't worry, I'll do it. I'll learn it. I'll get it. And so I flew out to India. We hadn't even had a rehearsal. We didn't even get a rehearsal. The first show was in Shillong, and people in a football stadium. And it was us and White Lion. And I remember walking out on stage, and we'd never even struck a chord together. I walked out completely. They sent the tracks, and they sent me like random video how we end this track sometimes, and so it was so loose that I was pretty anxious walking out on stage. I drank about 4 Red Bulls to get through the jet lag as well, so I was late. But the point during that concert, Joe just turned round to me and said, dude, it's the same as you did in Raleigh, North Carolina. Went, just rip out a solo, man, in E minor. And I was like, what? I'm thinking, damn, man, I mean, put me on the spot, just like come up, just make some stuff up on the spot. 43,000 people watching. And so he did. And I did. I just ripped out, just did my thing. The crowd went wild. And then he told the choir to be quiet. He went like, shh, like that. And then he took the microphone away from his mouth. But him, man, that's what it's like to have 43,000 people in the palm of your hand. And it was like, he's my best mate. He's the godfather to my child.
Nice.
I was the best man at his wedding. He wasn't mine. And it was literally like two mates just sharing an extremely extraordinary moment in the most bizarre of circumstances.
Chris, how can folks stay in touch with you, buy some merchandise, buy this new album? How can they do that, man?
I've got a brand new website, chrisgreenmusic.com, and there you can see my discography, biography. You can buy the Unveil EP there, and you get a free 8-page digital booklet, which has all the explanations to what was going through my head when I was writing all of these songs. So everything would be on chrisgreenmusic.com. It's also on Amazon and iTunes under Chris Green Unveil. And if you also want to check out the new Tyketto album that we released in October, that album's called Reach, and that's out on Frontiers Records. And I'm very, very happy with how that came out. We recorded that in a fantastic studio in Wales called Rockfield Studios, like a 600-year-old farm that has a studio that Zeppelin, Sabbath, Priest, all these people played in this studio. It was Queen did Bohemian Rhapsody in there. The piano that's on our ballad on there it's the same piano.
That is awesome.
Yeah, it was amazing, man, really amazing. So chrisgreenmusic.com or Amazon and iTunes, please check out either Chris Green or Tyketto, which is Tyketto.
Good sir, before I let you go, will you care to do a promo for my show?
Of course. Hey, this is Chris Green from Tyketto and Rubicon Cross, and you're listening to BODS Mayhem Hour.
Everybody stick around. We got some great music coming up, and you only hear these interviews right here on BODS Mayhem Hour and Uber City Radio. Thank you so much, Chris.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
Now you're the golden.